Now that we have filled in our color wheel and we have identified our primary colors, our secondary colors, and our tertiary or intermediate colors, you'll notice that the printed out version of the color wheel has some extra parts to it. And this is to help you not only to study for your vocabulary test on color theory, but when it comes to color mixing, these are some important color theory terms that you need to be able to identify quickly. So we're going to start down below here with the triangle, and we're going to label it as triadic. You can be as fancy as you want with the labeling, just as long as you get the word triadic written on the triangle. Our arrow is going to represent complementary colors. So I divided up into both sections the complete word of complementary. And our last section, our last piece of the color wheel here, is our adjacents. So this helps us identify colors next to each other on the color wheel. So you can label this adjacent. Once you have these labeled, you will want to carefully cut off the bottom of this color wheel and cut out these pieces and attach them to your color wheel. So here is one where I have cut out the pieces, and I had a brass fastener, so I used that to attach these components. And now I can freely move these to help me identify different terms of color theory. So if I need an adjacent, and it's also known as analogous, set of colors, I can move this opening to that circle so that it encompasses some colors that are adjacent or analogous. If I need to identify a complementary set, I can just move my arrow, and where it points to one color, the complement to that color is on the opposite end. And the Triadic Triangle will help me identify colors that are 3 equal distance from each other on the color wheel, as this is an equilateral triangle. If you don't have a brass fastener, you can just leave your pieces free-formed. You could temporarily tack them on top of each other with some tape, just so that you don't lose them, but don't secure them down with glue, because you do want the ability to be able to move these when needed. And that completes your color wheel. For those of you who made your own color wheel and you don't have the printout to complete that center area, you're going to need your color wheels set off to the side so you have them to use these new parts with later. You'll need a new sheet of paper, a ruler, a pencil, and a compass. The first thing I'm going to make is my equilateral triangle. And I'm going to work down at the bottom of my paper. I'm going to place my ruler near the bottom. Notice I can still see some paper down below here. I have the 0 of my ruler on the left side, and I'm going to make an equilateral triangle that is 3 1/4 inches big. So I'm going to make a mark at 3 and a mark at 6 1/4 inches, because I want to create this equilateral triangle in the middle of this space, or close to the middle of the space. I don't want to be over near my edge. And I'm going to draw a straight line between 3 and 6 1/4. Now this is where you'll need the compass. You're going to take the center of your compass and place it over your end of your line at the 3-inch mark, and you'll see that if you have a compass like mine, the 3 1/4 inch mark hole reaches the end of this line. If you don't have a compass like this and you're using the ones that have 2 legs, you want to put the center point of your compass on one end of the line and your pencil on the other end of the line. And all you're going to do is create part of a circle. Then you're going to do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to put the center of my compass on this part of the line at this end, and I'm going to draw part of a circle touching the other end of the line. So once again, my 3/4 inch mark for my compass is at the end there. Now I'll have something that looks like this. So to finish off my triangle, I'm going to connect where these 2 lines meet to my line that I drew first. And I'm going to do that to both ends of the line, connecting it to that crossover point that the compass lines created. And once I have that done, I have an equilateral triangle. If I measure it, each side is going to be 3 1/4 inches in length. My next step is I'm going to draw out all the pieces I need to create the parts of the color wheel that will help me study for my test and help me when it comes to color mixing. So I'm going to come to the top of my paper, and starting on the left edge, I'm going to measure over 4 inches, and I'm going to move my ruler down some, and 0 on the left edge. I'm going to again measure over 4 inches, and I'm just going to put a light line here. So I'm going to line up my 2 marks and create a light line. Now that I have that, I'm going to turn my paper because I want to make a rectangle here. So I'm putting near what is now my new bottom edge of my paper, I'm putting a 0 of my ruler on the left side, and I just need 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to move over here, 0 on the left edge, and again 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to connect those to create a rectangle. This I'm going to turn into an arrow for my complementaries. So I'm going to judge about where the center of that 3/4 inch is. And I'm going to turn my paper once again. And I want my arrowhead to be about a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to, along this line I have, the bottom of my rectangle, measure a 1/2 inch from both ends. So that's a mark at the 1/2 inch and a mark at 3.5. Going to put those same marks at the top of my paper, 1/2 inch, 3.5. And I'm going to connect those marks to that little mark I made for about the halfway point of the 3/4 inch measurement. And once I have that, then those 2 little marks I made that are at the end of my arrowheads, I'm just going to draw a little indent in on each one to form my arrowheads. And without measuring, I'm just going to use my sight to try to get as best as I can a parallel line. And I don't want to make my arrow's body too thin, so I'm just going to connect those in so that will be my complementary arrow. That leaves one part, and that is the larger circle to help me identify adjacent and analogous parts of the color wheel. So that I'm just going to draw a circle. I'm going to make my circle about 4 inches. So that's going to be a 2-inch radius to make it a 4-inch diameter. And since I do have a little groove to cut out, I'm going to come down about a 1/2 inch should be good. So I'm coming to the 1.5 radius and creating a smaller circle inside. And then I just want to cut out a little wedge here. So I do want the wedge to be able to encompass at least 3 of my colors. So I'm bringing over my color wheel here. So if I have my wedge here, and I am close to the center of my color wheel, my other part I'm going to cut out over about here. So before I cut these out, I'm going to label them. Now the center of this arrow, and since it is 4 inches, we can mark the center of that very quickly. So I'm making a mark at 2 inches. That is where, if you have a brass fastener, you would put a hole through it. So I may not want to write the word complementary directly across from there, because if I do end up poking a hole in that, I don't want to lose part of my letters. So I'm going to split it up just like I did on the printed out version. So that's my complementary arrow. This will be my adjacent, also known as analogous wheel. And this is, of course, my triadic triangle. And now that I have these parts drawn out, I'm ready to cut these out to attach them to my homemade color wheel. Even if you don't have a brass fastener, and whether you have the printed out version of the color wheel or your homemade color wheel, when it comes to these extra parts, you can still use these even though they're not attached. So if I need to find an adjacent set of colors, I can just lay my adjacent wheel on here, and that cutout opening will encompass any colors that are next to each other and make it easier to identify them. Same thing with my Triadic Triangle. So even if I don't have a brass fastener, I can still lay the points to identify 3 colors equal distance from each other on the color wheel. And the same with my complementary arrow. So again, even if I may not have a way to attach it to the color wheel, I can still use it to help me identify complementary colors quickly. So once you completed your color wheel and you've labeled and cut out the parts, again, whether it's the printed out version or your handmade version, you can still use these pieces even though you may not have a way to attach them to the color wheel.